want to introduce you tonight to our fabulous panel. They are ready to go and answer those tough questions. They will each just wave to the camera for a moment as we introduce them here tonight. First up, we have Keisha Bryant. Keisha works for an insurance broker. After living together with her boyfriend for 16 years and their 4 children, they got married because of their involvement with TakeCharge. We have Lamont Pykinen here. Lamont is a 2020 college graduate that works for a Minnesota state senator. Elfrida Baldwin is with us tonight, a retired attorney. Elfrida was in-house counsel at Securian Financial for 32 years. After retirement, she's still quite busy. She started a private micro-elementary school to give parents an alternative to public schools. Wayne Bugg is behind her. Wayne is a former gang member. He's honest and open about his past, but after becoming a Christian, he reconnected with the mother of his children, and he married her. He is now Associate Executive Director of St. Vincent de Paul in South Minneapolis. Diane Naper is also, I should apologize, and Diane is the owner of Porous Moon Graphic Design, providing services to small businesses, nonprofits, foundations, and global corporations. Thank you, Diane, for being here also. Hillary Swanson is next to her, a community paramedicine coordinator at Regents Hospital. Jim Bean is here. He is a working class father of 4 who played football for the University of Minnesota, and he's also a local pastor who was brave enough to also run to be in the state legislature. Thank you, Jim, for being here. And Eric Hines. During his 30 years as a sales management executive for Cargill and Land O'Lakes, Eric's passion to give back led him to numerous volunteer opportunities and leadership roles. Eric is also the father of 2 children. And we have Shiromi Beach here as well, our final panelist. She was raised in a broken but loving home. She is a therapist with a master's in psychology and works at Christian Family Solutions, an adolescent day treatment center, as a program manager. And finally, we have Kendall and Sheila Qualls with us tonight, close to me here, but that's the reason we're all here tonight. Kendall, your organization, TakeCharge, you are president. Sheila is the executive director, and you guys are doing great things in the community. But talk about that, why this was important to bring the panel together as we close out Black History Month, Kendall, and basically the mission of TakeCharge.
Yeah, absolutely. So Liz, thanks for having us and hosting this tonight. I can tell you, first of all, I am honored to be amongst these people here. A lot of these people have various different backgrounds. As you know, challenging backgrounds, they overcame, had success in their own lives, and that's really what TakeCharge is all about, that the promise of America is available to anyone, regardless of race, regardless of social station. And it could be challenging for some than others, but this is what the organization is about, and this is what our country is about. I think the narrative that we often hear, systemic racism, white supremacy, racist cops, and all of the things that we've heard, that we only hear from one side of the Black community, and there's a large percentage of us from various different backgrounds and political backgrounds. This group represents Republicans, Democrats, Independents, all above, but we all have one thing in common, if it's our faith, and that we believe that 2-parent families make a big difference in a child's life, and that is the biggest issue that's causing disparities in our country.
Well, you're right. It does seem we're surrounded by these very divisive conversations, this race situation constantly being put out there. But you're really here to say you can take charge of your life, and that's really part of the mission here.
Absolutely. And again, I think another thing in common with all of us in our backgrounds, we came from very challenging starts in life, very challenging. But we overcame those. There are people in this country that are willing to extend a helping hand, regardless of race, and that there is a pathway. And we want to help show our kids a different path and a different narrative than they're hearing right now in their local communities.
And I do want to start there with our panel, because you guys do really have great, interesting backgrounds and so much to bring to the conversation tonight. Just talk about why you wanted to be involved with TakeCharge, because it is brave to speak out on these issues. And Wayne, you're up first for just telling us a little bit about your story and why this is something you wanted to do.
Yeah, I had a difficult upbringing, loving home, but things was hard. The neighborhood I grew up in, there was high poverty, high crime, depression, desperation. There was a lack of hope. And I became, I would say, a product of my environment. And so by the age of 15, I got expelled from high school, really with nowhere to turn. I reached out to an aunt of mine who allowed me to come move with her, and which landed me in Minnesota. Thanks to God that I landed in a community and organization that helped me, help foster me. And so faith, family, and education were some of the basis of the things, my foundation, that helped change my life. And so when I met Kendall, and he said this organization was about that, then that's something I said I can come alongside.
That's great. And Keisha, you're very honest. You came to take charge. It's the reason you married your husband, which you said your husband reminds you of quite often. But your backstory is quite interesting, too.
Yes, and I married him first and foremost because I love him.
Okay.
I'm going to throw that out there just in case he's listening. But, you know, I got involved with Take Charge. I remember the day that I met Coffee, who's also a part of this organization, and she told me about Take Charge. I remember the day that I looked at the website and I read through the message, and I remember the feeling of hope. It's interesting that you use that word, hope. I remember having that feeling, and I just thought, you know, I have to be involved with something like this. You know, this was a time where we're a year past George Floyd, COVID, and that's all we're hearing about. Every time we turn our head, it's all about racism, and through social media, through the news. My children were even asking questions. Why is it every time we turn on the TV, it's always about racism? And so I just thought, you know what, I have to get out there and share this message and hopefully share the same feeling that I had that day that I saw that website, which is hope, which is you're not a victim. And guess what? You can be successful. This is going to sound crazy, and it's not based on the color of your skin. That outcome is not based on that. So I wanted to share that message and inspire others.
Great. And Lamont will give you a microphone too, but that message was important. Even someone, you know, like yourself, you're a young, busy man. Why did you want to get involved with Take Charge?
One of the reasons why I wanted to get involved with Take Charge as the youngest member here was to be able to reach out to the Black youth on being successful and understanding that you have the individual, as an individual, you have the choice to be successful. It doesn't have anything to do with your skin color. And like growing up, I grew up in a white neighborhood. I was subjected to many unfair forms of racism, unfair treatment, and I was able to overcome that. I mean, there was a time when, you know, when you're young and you deal with this, it's like you ask yourself, is there something wrong with me? No, there's nothing wrong with you. But, you know, certain individuals have a, you know, problem with you because of, you know, your skin color. And, you know, when you grow up with that and when you're told, you know, our society right now is just telling these kids who are in this vulnerable position, like, yes, it is your skin color. You don't have, you know, a choice to, you know, move on up in life. You know, you have to depend on the government. You have to depend on someone who's in a race that's in a higher up in the hierarchy than you. I think that's a problem. That's something that I want to fight with Kendall Qualls and many of the people here who disagree with that statement.
That these seeds are being planted at very young ages.
Yes, absolutely. It's just like, I've had friends tell me, like, when I was younger about how they didn't believe, like, getting an education was the way out. They believed it was sports or rap. And that, to me, is a problem, and our society is basically telling them that. And I think as we go through this town hall, we'll speak more about this, so.
Yeah, and I do want to start there with education because I think that, you know, is such an important topic. And Alfreda, we have the first question to you because you kind of started your school for this reason. But just explain your view on education in Minnesota, not only as it relates to Black students, but really all students for that matter, the state of education.
The state of education, if I could use words that would be inappropriate, I would, because it's that bad. The test scores tell the tale. The news stories about the incidents of violence tell the tale. And what I saw when I was volunteering was that discipline had been taken off the table because the Obama administration had decided there were too many Black kids being expelled and so forth. So discipline's out the window. The curriculum is garbage, and it's getting worse because they're adding CRT everywhere they possibly can.
We also hear that black students are not succeeding, Elfrida, because they don't have enough black teachers in the classroom. They need that in order to excel. You know, that's why they're not performing well academically. What do you say to those narratives?
I would disagree with that. I mean, I think from kindergarten through law school, I had maybe 2 or 3 black teachers. There are kids who've had no black teachers. It's the quality of the teacher that matters. The teacher needs to believe in them. The teacher needs to be competent. Would it be nice for there to be more black teachers? Sure. But where are they going to come from when you keep lowering the standards? If we don't expect black kids to read and write and do math, I wouldn't want somebody like that teaching my kids.
Jim will ask you that question since you have young children at home as well, but how would you rate the education system in Minnesota?
I would say early on, it was one of the best, but recent years, we have seen a huge decline. And based on what is being taught, the curriculum, with my children alone, it's a turnoff. Every subject is about race. My daughter who's in the 4th grade reading a book, Brown Girl, what is it called? Brown Girl something, and the whole book is about race, going back to the 60s, going back to the Jim Crow. And she just does not want to be a part of the classroom. And so I would say the curriculum, if we can get back to reading, writing, arithmetic, and looking and being innovative, looking at the future. You know, we have a great opportunity to do some great things in the future, but we keep running back to the past. And so if we can get over this hump, I know we can't change the system, but if we can get back to real education, I think kids will be more enthused about learning.
And Alfredo, you brought this up about violence in schools. You had a student fatally stabbed at Harding High School in St. Paul, then gang retaliation just a few days later at a funeral. And then you have teachers, you have educators, you have police saying, we're not even surprised this happened. We saw this coming. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about that, Alfredo. That has to be just so troubling as an educator yourself when all of these red flags are there.
Well, it makes me want to put on a tinfoil hat because it's like if everybody saw this was coming, why didn't anyone do anything about it? And then people start talking about solutions and they talk about we have to address gun violence as though guns were getting up and killing people when it's these troubled individuals that are killing people. And they never, ever talk about family structure and the fact that kids are not being properly instructed in reading and math. So until they get serious about addressing those issues, this isn't going to get fixed.
And Diane, maybe you could speak to that as well. What prevents this in schools? What fixes this?
I think that what we have to do is teach our children to not be so focused on race. Well, first of all, we have to educate them. I saw recently there's a bill going through the legislature where they want to teach ethnic studies. You have to take this ethnic studies course before you can graduate high school. Well, if the kids can't read or write or do math, how is that going to help them in the real world once they leave school? So first of all, we have to stop focusing on race so much, because if that's all kids are hearing 24/7, of course it's going to affect who they are when they get out into the real world. And they leave with a chip on their shoulder. And we have to get, again, like Kendall talks about with this organization, we have to get back to the basics. We have to talk about fatherless homes and why that's a problem. We have to steer people back to a foundation in faith. And then we have to fix the education system that focuses on a quality education and not just one that's about indoctrinating children for the sake of gaining political power.
And you're right, we do hear the mainstream media push this message an awful lot, that people are racist. We hear again and again, it seems like from the paid protesters, from the mob. And it seems that the decisions that they make come at a high cost for the black community. Why do you think your voices are not represented in the community and in the media? Maybe Diane, since you have the microphone, you can go ahead and ask that. You're a smart, successful woman. We'd like to hear from you, but why do you think that's the case?
I think it's because of how toxic the word racism and the words racism and racist are. They have such a deep meaning in the United States in particular, and it's like a wound that people keep picking at. They won't just let it heal. And so it's tough to fight back against that, because if someone calls you a racist and you say, no, I'm not, they say, well, that just proves that you are. So being branded, whatever your political views are, but particularly if you're a Republican, you get branded as a racist, and then people stop listening. They don't want to hear anything more from you. And I will say that, I've had my share of racist incidents in my life, but I actually, two that I recall very much so, I didn't know about them until after the fact. And that's when I was told that someone was treating me in a racist manner. And what I realized years later was, you know what? I wasn't looking for it. So I think we have to stop looking for racism at every single turn and under every single rock and with every single interaction that we have with people. And that's when we start to, because if you're not seeing it, you're not giving that person the power that they're looking for to get a rise out of you.
Kendall?
Yeah, if I go on this too, and I talk about this quite a bit. This whole issue, you talk about racism, we hear it quite a bit. It's a manufactured problem. This is the least racist time in our country's history. We're the least racist country in the world, and those are documented facts. We're being used as Americans because they know how tender, and they know how this wound traced back for many years, and they're using it to divide us for a political agenda to transform our country into something was never intended to be. And we're being used, and we get emotional through it. Those that are very vulnerable, they're uneducated, they don't have a lot of options, they're being used as a ploy. And it's the most evil thing you can consider. It's sad, because a lot of these kids can have a very different future, but they're not being allowed to do that.
Hillary, I heard you, or saw you nodding over there that you agree with this. Just this R word, it can really do a lot of damage to someone.
I also think about the media that we've been talking about and how people don't want to hear certain voices. And this is what I think about. I think about tickled ears, itching ears, and how oftentimes people want to amass around them only certain teachers and only certain people that will say what they want to hear. Sometimes the truth is difficult, but the truth is also freeing. So I think when we talk about we're not the voices that you don't hear in the media, it's because the truth is not as enticing as what we sometimes want to hear instead. And so that's one thing about racism. If you think about it, sometimes there's a sense of victimhood has a sense of power if you think about it. I just saw a video the other day of white kids bowing down to black kids. That's what we've come to, because we want people to understand our victimhood and understand that you've trodden down on us, and that's what it's turned into. That is ridiculous. So there's a sense that sometimes if you think of yourself as a victim, there's a sense of power there. Well, it's a false power. What the real power is having the truth and using the truth to set yourself free. And so with the media, sometimes you can see that the media is not interested, as I said. They're not interested in the truth because they want to gin up things and they want people to submit to a false narrative. But we're here to break that. We're going to tell the truth. And why we're doing it is because we love African Americans. We love people. So because we love people, we are going to tell the truth, and we're going to be unafraid.
What a powerful message. Thank you, Hillary. And we often hear about this mass incarceration drove the fatherless home problem in the black community. And Eric, I'm hoping you can speak to that a bit. That's a common narrative, but what's your perspective there?
Actually, I don't believe that's accurate. I think statistically it does contribute, but I think it's really a personal preference that's driven by values. If you value family, if you value close-knitness of a family, if you value people, if you value the relationship that you have by fatherhood, then you're going to spend time on that. If you don't value those things, the opposite occurs. So it really becomes a question of what you value. And valuing family and fatherhood and parenthood and closeness in the community is what's driving that, not necessarily the notion that mass incarceration is contributing to fatherless homes.
I know you were part of the I Am a Victor documentary, which is a great film. Many of you were featured in at Salem Broadcasting, now streams on their website. Why was that something that you wanted to talk about in that documentary as well? As I said, you guys are tackling some tough subjects and really putting a lot of this on the father in a black family, and to bring those fathers back.
So one of the things that we noticed in that documentary is the mindset. And I think a few people here have mentioned the word hope. And if you have a mindset that you believe in yourself, you believe in your culture, you believe in the people themselves, it's a whole different way that you go through life. It's important to me from a standpoint of trying to give back, trying to set some basis for younger people that's coming up. And if they look at this as not being a victim, but more being, I can do this. I'm proud of myself. I'm proud of my culture. I'm proud of what we're trying to accomplish. I think it sets the groundwork for good things to happen.
And just looking back, Elfrida will probably have you take this one, but you talk about also in the documentary growing up post Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society, in the 60s, and the fallout that happened from there. And I think this is so important for people to understand this part about history. And then Kendall, I know you could weigh in on that as well, because it's what a lot of your work centers on at Take Charge.
Right, so we get to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and that's a moment of victory. But then LBJ comes in with his war on poverty, and it changes welfare law. And they basically said, you can have welfare, but you cannot have a man in the house. And that began this downward spiral of black men being made irrelevant. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to get involved with Take Charge, because I'm insulted by what has happened to black men. And it changed our culture. So we have these fatherless homes, many times they're motherless homes. And then we have this narrative constantly of America's against you. All these disparities are because of your skin color, when in fact they are because the family was destroyed.
And Kendall, you said that before. This is the elephant in the room that people don't want to talk about.
I call it the biggest elephant in the room in the country. At that time, again, remember, I was born in 1963, 80% of black families were two-parent families, 80%. Today, they're 80% fatherless homes. I always joke, it's sad, but it's true. If we were an American eagle or a grizzly bear, we would be on the endangered species list, and there would be bumper stickers and galas, basically save the black family. But there has not been one attempt to reverse the trend of the downward spiral of the two-parent family because they didn't want to. You can be, when a family or people are dependent on government, those people are in permanent power. And the people in the community that get the downfall of that permanent power of wealth and all the money that goes with that, they're doing it at the expense of these kids, and no one wants to talk about. In Hennepin County and Ramsey County, any given year, nearly 90% of our kids are born without a father in the home. No culture in the world lives like that. None. And it's time for us to stop acting like this is normal. We're wondering why, wow, we got this mass incarceration and these kids of color are in the schools and they don't. No, these are kids with no fathers. And unfortunately, it's gravitating in other ethnic groups in the country, and it's going to cause mass mayhem if we don't get this under control.
Wayne?
And so I may disagree a little bit here. So I know we don't want to go back, but going back to slavery, our country to a degree was built on free labor. That in order for that enterprise to continue to exist, they need prisoners. The prison population produces and manufactures millions of dollars, maybe billions of dollars worth of stuff. So they need to continue to fill those spots with people. So this war on poverty, why are people poor? And a lot of it is because they were placed in these zip codes, these zones from back in the day, redlining, right? And so the people were redlined, so they couldn't move to certain areas, and so they were stuck. And so then they show up and say, "I can help you out. We're gonna have this war on poverty, so you can move to these certain places." The one caveat is that the father can't come with. Now, as a father, what does that do for you? You have to make the decision that I can provide a place to stay for my family, or we can all be poor somewhere else. And so a lot of men chose to let their wives and their children go live in a place so that they could have a roof on their head. But then that left them to just be hanging out on the streets. And that's depressing. As a father, if you cannot provide for your kids, I don't know how, that's a difficult thing, at least back then. And so here they're hanging out on the street corners and drinking and smoking to deal with the fact is that they feel less than a man. And so then the crack cocaine falls in the black neighborhood, and so now they got some way of making some extra cash or whatever the case may be, and they get locked up. And so I do think to a degree that all of this stuff goes together. I do think that there's a way out, but I don't think that this stuff is no accident. I don't think the incarceration rate, I don't think the schooling and all those different things that I lived in, and I couldn't put a name to it as a kid, but as an adult, hearing all these different things, I was surprised that this was allowed to go on.
Well, Wayne, can I ask you, because we have some questions coming in on our YouTube and on our Facebook pages, but they're asking specifically about what you guys think. How do you address the gang violence going on right now, specifically what we've seen in St. Paul and the retaliation back and forth?
Obviously, as this organization focuses on, having a two-parent home, having a father there to be able to help guide this child, because when the father's not there, you have these other voices that guide this child. All right, so say you're able to get that, then you need to have resources for these communities so that these kids have something to do. And if you have 10 to 15-year-olds just hanging out because they don't have a YWCA membership or anything like that, then they'll find stuff to do. And if they're poor, then you have people that prey on people like that, and they'll find stuff for them to do to make a little extra money to get a pair of shoes or things of that nature. And so I think that these communities need to be resourced so that these kids have something else to do. And so I think that was one of the ways to curb that and get these fathers back. And it also may require some of us to show up in these communities. Until these fathers come back in place, we cannot purchase our way out of the hood. We get paid sometimes and we get a little tired and everything, and then we going out to the suburbs. It's a reinvestment in us to go back there and save our communities.
What about this defund the police issue? That's often pushed as that's something that's supported by the black community, less police. What would you say about that, Wayne?
Yeah, I don't think that's a wide agreed upon issue regarding African Americans in the community. I think that what African Americans want is police that care, that treat me fair, treat me just. I think that they want to be protected like everybody else. They pay taxes, and so we want the same amount of protection, the same type of service, but we want to be treated with dignity. And so I remember a story or a time when I got pulled over by police. I was sitting in the back of somebody's truck. The police told me to get out. I got out, put your hands on the car, put your hands on the car, and then he took out his nightstick and hit me in the back of the head. Like, I ain't did nothing to that man. And so then he took my cigarettes in my pocket, broke them, threw them on the ground, and then told the driver to pull off and leave me in that neighborhood that I was in. So I had to walk home. That's what they don't want. Don't care about, get paid, pay the police, pay the people, the public servants that's doing the work. But we want a different type of policing.
Jim, do you want to weigh in on that with just the issue of police?
I was thinking about this organization, faith, family, education. My Christian faith is I'm held accountable, first of all, to God. And me being a dad, me being a husband, that's my primary focus with ministry. When you think about family, my children, I know where they are, I know what they're doing, we have our boundaries. Big difference than what's going on in these streets or in the inner city, even in the suburbs. The suburbs are changing as well. And then get back to education. Education is the vehicle to success. What we're basically talking about is success. How do we get there? And if we can keep those three the primary focus, I believe we're going to achieve a lot. I'm very optimistic. I'm looking for the future. I'm trying to build for the future. I don't want to get stuck in the past. We got that. I'm looking forward to the future.
Shromi, I want to bring you into the conversation, talking about DEI for a moment, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Of course, this has been around for decades, but it seems very in our face now in corporate America, from desk jobs, everybody to, who's flying our airplanes all of a sudden. I know Kendall has a lot to say on this topic in his podcast as well, but is that something that people should support, this DEI, and talk about just, from your perspective, what it means?
So whenever you end a word with ism, I want you to think narcissism. Because a lot of the things that we are struggling with as a nation has to deal with narcissism. There is a sense of the me, myself, and I. And if the me, myself, and I is going to gain, then there needs to be a difference. So we get back into Marxism. So I would encourage for those of you who struggle with any ism, remember about Karl Marx and remember about the me, myself, and I. Because when it comes to faith, education, family, those tenets are not about the me, myself, and I. They're about the exploration of self and how can we bring the best out in one another and those around us so we can succeed as a nation. But as long as we stay in what we call learned helplessness, that because of who you are or because of what you've been in, you will not succeed in life. I must help you. This goes back to the metaphor of give someone a rod and teach them to fish. This is transparent in terms of what you were bringing up about diversity, inclusion, and equity. It's all about shifting resources. When you start looking at these organizations and who is actually benefiting from the marketing, when you go into your grocery store and you can see during Christmas time, for example, snowflakes, snowmen, Christmas trees. Where do you go for the actual nativity scene? So when we're talking about diversity, inclusion, and equity, we're actually talking about how do we become divisive? How do we make indecision? And how do we take away someone else's equity? Yeah, you're hearing a little bit of libertarian in me. Rather than actually supporting the well-being of our society. And that does start with the families. So if you're in a family system that is teaching you that and we sometimes say that parents teach this, and I want to clear that up. What parents do is that they model. When they're on the phone with their friend, when they're gossiping with the neighbor, when they're venting about what they see in the media, that's how these kids are being taught. They are witnessing the breakdown of society in the home by, I have a better opinion and view than the one that actually serves a purpose for bringing a neighborhood together. So when you look at diversity, inclusion, and equity, my question would be, is what is the outcome you're actually looking to achieve with that? Because every American deserves the right to have progress and success and to maintain an education that allows them to feel confident in whatever career or field. I am very thankful for my garbage man. I will say that because I can't do that. But I am thankful for the person who says, you know what, I can do that, and I get paid well to do that. So diversity stuff, there's a time and a place for it. But usually, I would encourage others, look at yourself first. Why did you immediately make that assumption of race or sexism? Or even if you're giving feedback to someone, why are you being conscientious of what ism is in play? Just be objective. Stick with the facts. Take ownership for the things that you need to take ownership for. Let's promote responsibility rather than division.
Eric, what can you say to that with people sometimes I know have asked Kendall too, can you opt out of this at work? Is it something that can you even really broach that topic? But what is your advice to people, when it comes to that?
Well, I do differ a little bit with what was said. I do believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's who we are. I mean, I don't think the dynamics of this country is going to change anytime soon from being in that position. And I think for the most part that it is a positive thing. But at the end of the day, as we continue to try to progress, we don't need to make that the primary focus. It's there, we call it out, we recognize it, but at the end of the day, it's not the primary focus. The primary focus is how do we cohabitate, how do we get along, how do we move forward in the nation. If you look at any corporate Americas, for the most part, it's everywhere. And it should be everywhere, but it shouldn't be used as a crutch to not check in, nor should it be used as an excuse to hate.
Lamont, you want to weigh in on the DEI topic?
So, as you know, we've all been talking about, like, we all seem to have a problem with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think, like, one of the big problems that I have with it is that it's based on this book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and it's based on anti-racism by Ibram X. Kendi. And, you know, when reading the book, I don't think he's, you know, a bad guy. I just believe that he's trying to talk about racism and talk about how it's a complex issue. But one of the issues, though, with this diversity, equity, inclusion is that it takes out a moral standard. It takes out moral values. When you read some of the stuff that is kind of tied in with anti-racism, one of the things it says that you can't criticize another culture, that all cultures are morally equal. So when you think about that, so does that mean that neo-Nazism is morally equivalent to, you know, me or something like that? You know what I'm saying? So it's just, you have to ask yourself, like, as a Christian, when you look at this stuff, do you have that moral standard to stand up against this? Because basically what DEI does is it just strips out the moral standards that we've had in this country in the past that has tied us together. And it's taking more of a pluralistic view of saying that there's just multiple different cultures with different moral values. And when you do that, you start creating a division in the country, and that can lead to devastating results. If Kendall wants to fill in on
No, please finish.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't want to grab it out of your hand.
Oh, no, I just saw you were, okay. But that's one of my biggest problems with that is this idea that you cannot criticize another culture or that all cultures are morally equivalent. Yeah, are there cultures that are different from each other? Yes. And should we accept those differences? Yes. But to say that, you know, for me as a Christian who has a moral standard that comes from the Bible, to say that, you know, this neo-Nazi culture is equivalent to that. No, it's not. And so DEI is very divisive in its nature, and I do believe it's a kind of like a Trojan horse when you think about it, to this nation.
Okay, I'll take it now. Okay. And so just to continue on DEI and just a follow-up comment. So first of all, you know, you were very gracious to Ibram X. Kendi that he's not a bad guy. He is a bad guy. He hates the country. He hates the country and everything it stands for. The founding documents, the founding fathers, he hates that. And if you have a better country, I mean, we're not the only country that received slaves from the African slave trade. If you have a better country where black people has prospered, and more than the United States, show me. And they don't have one. They're using this to drive an ideology that is rooted in Marxism. That's basically what it is. They're trying to make it like it's civil rights 2.0. It's not. And they have literally thrown out Martin Luther King's idea of content of character is what we should judge people by. They've thrown that out. They said, no, you need to look at me and identify me as a black person. Well, I am black. I'm not confused on looking in the mirror, but that's only one dimension. We're multidimensional. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a Christian, I'm a veteran. So their agenda is all divisive and to change the country. So I also want to comment on something you brought up earlier, especially with the gang-related and the violence and the poverty. Look, I grew up as a kid eating powdered eggs and government surplus cheese. That did not give me allowance. My parents didn't say, okay, go ahead and steal $750 worth of stuff from Walgreens. No, they didn't. So from my perspective, I don't care if you raised your kids with one parent, two parent, or 10 parents. It's your job to socialize these kids to the social norms of society. It's not okay to curse out and foul mouth with a teacher or get in the face of a police officer that's doing their job. Do we have people that wind up doing things that shouldn't? That we absolutely do, but they're not the norm. You can't cast a shadow against a whole organization because of a knucklehead. And the behaviors of our students in schools, how they're treating teachers, is unacceptable. Unacceptable. And they give one warning, next warning they're out. We don't hold accountability anymore. We blame everything on the teachers and everything else. These kids get away with behaviors that wouldn't be allowed in a generation before, when there were some tough grandmothers and some fathers in the community. They wouldn't even be allowed. The stuff that's happening today used to be policed in the home. Now we see it out in the streets in public. It's embarrassing to our ancestors what's going on right now.
Sheila, maybe we can bring you into the conversation and give you a chance to talk about this podcast that I know you're working on for Alpha News, but documenting just that, these out-of-control classrooms and the lack of respect that has been allowed to continue.
Yeah, it's really unbelievable, some of the things that teachers and parents and students even tell me. I had a conversation this afternoon with a gentleman who is a police officer, and he was just talking about how out of control it is. He said his family is like a fourth generation St. Paul school district. His kids would have been fourth generation. And he said he would not even consider putting his kids in that school district. And I think that says a lot, that his grandfather went there, his father went there, he went there, and now he won't put his kids there.
And I have to ask, Keisha, I know you have something to say on that issue. You were a St. Paul school district mother yourself, and you fled to the suburbs to escape it.
I did. It'll be almost 2 years next month. I lived in my home for 13 years. I grew up in St. Paul. I lived right around the corner from Harding High School. Right after we left, and I took a senior out her senior year. And she got through it. It was hard. No one wants to be taken out of their high school their senior year. But after I took her out, there was a school shooting. I cried. And then the young man was first day of school, killed. I cried. What's happening in St. Paul is not okay. That's not the city that I recognize. So yeah, I experienced it firsthand, and I saw this all unravel before my eyes slowly over the last 10 years. And it starts with, like what you're saying, not holding these children accountable.
On the subject matter of church, I'm wondering how much of a role should our churches play really in stepping in and fighting back against some of these narratives, because I do feel like sometimes there is more of a passive approach when it comes to our churches. Maybe Elfrida, if you want to take that question about what kind of role the church should play.
The Word of God is truth. And there's supposed to be shepherds in our churches leading us and helping us understand the Word and live by it. The Black church used to have that. The faith of my grandparents and parents and people who had nothing and were enslaved, who held on to hope because of their faith. That's when we were thriving, when we had that. The Black church today, I'm not going to paint them all this way, but there are many of them that are morally and spiritually bankrupt. And they are led by people who are getting rich while they have a bunch of single moms in their church with kids who are out of control, and they're driving around with Bentleys and Rolexes. I am from Chicago. I pay attention to what's going on down there. You get out a Google map and there's a storefront church or two on every corner. in neighborhoods that are war zones. That's a sign that your pastor is not doing his job.
Diane, do you want to weigh in there?
Yeah, I grew up in the church, and I will admit that I strayed to some extent, after I got out of college. But I came back to it because, as Alfreda says, the Word of God is truth. And when you don't have a foundation, a moral foundation or a foundation in something bigger than yourself, then you're lost. And I think that's the big part of what's wrong with kids today, is that they're not being grounded in something that's bigger than themselves, that they are yet still a part of. So our moral authority comes from God. It doesn't come from the man next door. It doesn't come from your pastor. It comes from God. And if kids don't have that grounding, that moral foundation, then there's no reason for them to value life. There's no reason for them to care about anyone but themselves and have that me, myself, I attitude that it's all about me, and it has nothing to do with doing the right thing or being kind to people or being grateful for what you do have and taking ownership and agency of your own self and your own choices. We're all free to go to the library. Last time I checked, the library was free. So that's part of the problem, is that our kids, they can't read, so they don't get to go to the library to open their imaginations and dream of other worlds and learn about the past and learn about great leaders throughout history who have pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, who have made something of themselves because they believed in themselves and they had that moral foundation from their faith.
Sheila, what would you say about the church?
Yeah, Alfreda spoke about the black church, but, I'm talking about the church in general. I mean, it has really fallen down on the job. Because if the church was doing its job, the job that it's supposed to be doing, I don't think that our communities would be in the situation that they're in today. And I think today that we have way too many pastors who are more concerned about offending people than they are about offending God. And I think that that's something that needs to change. Kendall and I just switched to a different church. And part of the reason we switched, it was the church we were at was doctrinally sound. There was no problem with it biblically. But sitting in church on Sunday mornings, we would never know that the world was falling apart. They don't talk about social issues. They don't talk about the fatherless home issues. It's sort of like, as Kendall says, as the band played on the deck of the Titanic, you never would have known that the ship was sinking. And that's exactly what's happening with our churches. So I think that I just refuse to sit in a church where they're not going to give me knowledge and skills in order to address everyday life. That's why we go to church. We go to church so that we can learn how to apply God's word to our lives.
Hillary, we'll have you take this next question. It was a question we're getting online too, just about Black Lives Matter. But according to its own website, the organization says, we are committed to disrupting the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement. We know that some Minnesota schools just finished up what they call BLM at Schools Week. It's a national coalition fighting for racial justice in schools, but it has 13 guiding principles, including globalism, queer affirming, and trans affirming. This is a question that is asked a lot, but is this an organization that people should support?
No, it's not. Black Lives Matter is a predatory organization. They have wiped their website, but originally their website said that they wanted to destroy the patriarchy. They were not for intact families. They were not for a lot of things that would help a nation continue to be a nation. So what they have done, which has been proven, is that they've amassed millions of dollars for themselves. So anytime that you see an organization that says, that wants to divide a people and then take money for themselves, you should run in the other direction. It's not helpful, it's not giving, it's not loving. It's not an organization that's going to perpetuate the value of family. It's an organization that wants to destroy the value of family. I do want to touch on briefly what Lamont said about the Trojan horse. I think it's really important when we talk about DEI being a Trojan horse. No one, as we said earlier, no one wants to be considered racist. No one wants to be called racist. So in a Fortune 500 company or in a company that has just regular people working, who would dare say, well, I don't want to be a part of DEI? Why would you say that? Here's the problem with DEI. Companies already have a system of values. They call it a code of ethics. You have responsibility, you have courage, you could have respect, you could have continuous learning. All of those things are considered a value. So if you already are respecting your colleagues, if you're already doing some continuous learning, if you're already valuing your colleagues, why do you need to insert DEI? Why do you need to insert that? You already have a code of ethics that you are following. DEI begins to separate people. That's what it does. That's why it's a Trojan horse, because who would want to stand up against that? It seems so good, right? No, it's a Trojan horse. The code of ethics is for everyone. Therefore, it goes past gender. It goes past race. It's a code of ethics for everyone. Why would you need DEI? You do not.
Shromi, I'm going to go ahead and ask you a question we're getting from our audience. Joe is wondering, does the panel think or feel that the mainstream media's coverage, bias, censorship has assisted or contributed to current social or societal attitudes currently manifesting?
So I follow 3 websites for my news.
Alpha News being one.
Yes, it actually is, along with, but I won't mention the other 2, obviously, because you're here. And the reason for that is my life is healthier and happier with just knowing enough. You know, what we have at censorship is that we have the over-reporting of agendas. And when we don't have an opportunity to talk about the things that can actually implement a change, and that's where we kind of start thinking about why aren't these other things being reported on? And we have to ask that question. We have forgotten critical thinking skills as a community. You know, just kind of thinking here about all the things that we've experienced in the Twin Cities area and the unhelpful responses to some of the more hurtful things that our communities have dealt with. I'm thinking in particular of that one woman in her wheelchair and about like her pharmacy being gone. You know, we have to get back to like what is humanity. Part of the censorship that's happening is that we lose the definition of what is a human-to-human interaction because we're being fed in various different ways, some of this soft influence that Hillary was mentioning, in such a way that we are forgetting that our neighbor still matters. And that takes us right back into faith. Treat your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. So how is censorship loving my neighbor? How is censorship serving my neighbor? When you don't feel safe in your communities anymore because of the policies that are being enacted or promoted, why are we censoring that? Why are those voices, which there is a collective, why can't they find a place where their issues are taken or their perspectives are taken more seriously? It's a great question.
So let me weigh in on this. So we commissioned a poll, a national poll amongst Black Americans on what organizations influence them the most in their personal lives. Black Lives Matter rated down to 12%. I mean, by far it wasn't close. But you have an organization like that that gets more news and more press than any of these people will by 100, and on the $1 million they amassed, and none of that money has gone to help the people in the communities that they say they were going to help. That's the issue. That is why we wanted to have this forum, because of that disproportionate type of representation.
And we actually have a question for you, Kendall, from JB. He's wondering, what work does TakeCharge do what kind of work do you do to perform to change minds, votes, policy of Black Minnesotans? Yeah, so we recently had a strategy meeting, and one of the first things in strategy is what you're not going to do. What are you going to define you're going to do, but what you're not going to do. There are a lot of organizations that address the symptoms of the problem, mentorship, all those things. We need those. What we're trying to do is actually go to the root problem and change the culture, move the culture back to its roots of faith, family, and education.
So for example, on our website, we have the largest video library in the country of Black Americans that call for a return to the roots of faith, family, and education, but also denounce Black Lives Matter, denounce critical race theory, promote marriage, all those things. One of the things we're going to be doing, it's a surprise, we're going to do related to fathers. That's coming, and it's going to, I think that it will have a local and national impact to promote fatherhood in a way that can get traction in our communities in the first time ever in 50 years.
That's wonderful. And as we wrap up here, let's just talk about maybe the top 2 or 3 for each of you, that, the biggest issues that you want to tackle with Take Charge and the biggest issues facing the Black community today. Sheila?
Wow. Well, there are so many issues. I think education probably is one of the biggest issues that we're facing. When we have a bunch of kids who don't have fathers and then they don't have an education, they're already starting out 2 or 3 steps behind everybody else. But I do want to say something about the mainstream media that Shiromi was talking about. And the reason why we're censored. The mainstream media and Black leadership, they don't want anyone to know that we exist. And that's why they censor us. They don't want anyone to know that we're here. And not only do they not want people to know that we're here, we defy their narrative. Everything that they say, every single one of us can say, you know what, that's not true. So I think that we are a well-kept secret, and I think that the more people that know about us, the more minds and hearts that will change.
Keisha, for you, the biggest issues?
The biggest issue to me is crime. I just want my family to be safe. I want to see police officers on the street again. I want to see police officers in our schools again. I've slowly watched what happened as our, 30% of Minneapolis police left. I mean, it's heartbreaking. We all want to be safe and raise our families.
For me, it's education. Frederick Douglass said that education was light and liberty. And I always say there was a reason they wouldn't let the slaves learn to read. And our kids can't read. When you can't read, you can't think critically, and that's a problem.
Awesome. Diane?
I agree with Alfreda 100% about that aspect of education. And it's not just happening here in Minnesota, it's happening around the country where I believe in Baltimore, not a single school, their kids they aren't reading at grade level in 3rd grade. Not a single school. And there's like 30 schools in Baltimore. How sad is that? And I think it's deliberate, and I think it's something that is done on purpose to help keep people down, not just Black people, but all people. Because if you control the language, you control the people, and if you only tell them enough so that they won't challenge you or try to overthrow you, that's where you keep your power. So,
Hillary, with our last about 30 seconds, just the biggest issues for you.
Yeah. I do want to say for Baltimore, they have the president of the city council's Black, the mayor's Black. I just don't understand, if you have all of these people in your corner and they're Black, what is happening? I would say that for me, it's about purpose. What is the purpose? If you don't have purpose, if you don't know your purpose, you are like a leaf in the wind, and you can cause great damage to the people around you and yourself if you don't know your purpose. You need to know who you are and what's available to you. If you don't know your purpose, what are you doing?
Well, I want to thank you all for being here. Kendall, thank you for organizing all of this. Sheila as well. You guys are incredible. And everybody is saying they want these town halls to continue. That's the poll. That's the outcome. So no pressure, but we're going to be back, okay? we were just getting started. But also, yes, thank you to Take Charge and AM 1280 The Patriot. And that will do it for our live town hall this evening. Minnesota Media's most censored group, Common Sense Black Americans. Be sure to stay tuned on Alpha News. Sign up for our free daily newsletter, all on alphanews.org. And remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Rumble. Have a great night, everyone. Again, thank you so much.